We're going to apply the GPS method on Jeremiah 48 from verse 29 through to verse 33. As usual, we go through the GPS method. We live in the 21st century, and Jeremiah lived many, many years ago before Christ. And between Jeremiah and the people in the 21st century, there are all these differences of language, tradition, time and situation, and history. Therefore, we need to go through three processes. The first one is understanding. It brings us to the message to the original receiver, and then we go through the process of application, whether that message is applicable or not, and if it's applicable, we communicate it in the 21st century. So let's start with understanding, and we use the acronym of START. The S is for the situation. The type of literature determines how we will analyze the passage, and then we relate the message to the rest of the Bible, and we also test our findings just to double check. So let's start with situation. The situation of the book of Jeremiah is the following. Jeremiah prophesies in Judah, late 7th century and early 6th century BC, in the time when Babel caused many nations trouble. The Moabites, and that is about Jeremiah 48. It's about the Moabites. The Moabites were the descendants of Lot by his older daughter, and you can read that in Genesis 19. It was after the episode of Sodom and Gomorrah. His two daughters made him drunk, and they slept with him, and two boys were born. And the one was descendants of the Moabites, and the other one descendants of the Ammonites. Point number 3, they lived on the east side of the Jordan River and Dead Sea. And interesting, Ruth was also from Moab. There was animosity between Israel and Moab for many years. In later years, approaching the time of Jeremiah, Israel and Moab fought several times, and Moab joined with Babylon against Judah. So this is in short the situation of Jeremiah 48. What's the type of literature? We see that it's poetry, and it's poetry in the prophets, because Jeremiah is part of the prophets in the Bible. Now we analyze our passage. We look for parallelisms, similes, metaphors, personification, and hyperbole. And number 2, we mark the main themes, and then we conclude and summarize the message to the original receiver of this passage. So let's begin with our analysis. Let's read from verse 29. We have heard of Moab's pride. How great is her arrogance, of her insolence, her pride, her conceit, and the haughtiness of her heart. I know her insolence, but it's futile, declares the Lord, and her boast accomplish nothing. Therefore I wail over Moab. For all Moab I cry out. I mourn for the people of Kir-hareseth. I weep for you as Jazer weeps, you vines of Sibmah. Your branches spread as far as the sea. They reach as far as Jazer. The destroyer has fallen on your ripened fruit and grapes. So what do we see here? We see parallelism. I know her insolence. It is the same as and her boast, but it's futile. Goes together with accomplish nothing. It's a perfect parallelism. And then we get a chiasm in verse 31. Therefore I wail is the same as I cry out. But we see it's a reverse parallelism. We call a chiasm, because this, if we call this A over Moab B, this will be A, so A goes with B and A goes with B. I cry out. So it's a reverse parallelism, a chiasm. And then we see in verse 32 the word as, and that tells us we have a simile. I weep for you as Jazer weeps. Your vines of Sibmah, your branches spread as far as the sea. So we have a one parallelism, a chiasm, and a simile. And then we also see that you have words that will relate to one another. Pride, arrogance, pride against, insolence, her conceit, haughtiness. And then we continue verse 33. Joy and gladness are gone from the orchards and fields of Moab. I have stopped the flow of wine from the presses, No one treats them with shouts of joy. Although there are shouts, there are not shouts of joy. So we see personification, and we see the word joy here many times. There's an absence of joy. We see the wine, we see the orchards, so there's no happiness anymore. And the reason, if we just go back, is because of her pride, her arrogance, her haughtiness, her insolence, her boast. And therefore I wail, says God, over Moab. It's interesting. This is the only time in the Bible, in the Old Testament, where God cries. And that is because of arrogance. Arrogance always makes God to cry, to feel bad, because when people are arrogant, they're not willing to listen and to submit. So we have the personification, we've marked the main themes, and then we realize that the message to the original receiver is arrogance and pride cause God to cry. Pride leads to destruction. And then we relate the message to the broader biblical and theological framework. That's the R of start. So we see in Proverbs 8, when we relate it to the rest of the Bible, it says in verse 13, to fear the Lord is to hate evil. I hate pride and arrogance, evil behavior, perverse speech. And also in Mark chapter 7, verse 20, he went on, what comes out of a person is what defiles them, for it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, and then arrogance and folly. You have other places in the Bible that will relate to this. So we see it does relate, and we've tested our findings by reading Bible commentaries, and we realize that we are on track. So the findings of number 3, when we analyze, remains the same, that arrogance and pride cause God to cry. Why? Because pride leads to destruction. It led to the destruction of the Moabites. And now the next step is to apply this message. We need to find out, is this message to the original receivers applicable to us or not? And we know we determine that by looking at whether it's an incidental or an essential. An incidental is when something is cultural, ceremonial, or civil, and an essential has to do with relationships when something is moral. That's true in any time, under all circumstances. So we realize that this is actually an essential. It has nothing to do with cultural, ceremonial, and civil laws. It's an essential. Therefore, we can communicate this message in the 21st century. We can do that in a small group. You can communicate it wherever you go. But in a small group, you are welcome to discuss the following questions. You can read day 155 of the Bible of your GPS, and you can answer the following questions. You can pause this video, and in the small group, you can answer and discuss the following questions.